Oh. Welcome to the March 26th meeting of Solidarity Lowell. Guidelines for our virtual meetings. Welcome to our hybrid meeting. Please continue to bear with us as we get used to the new technology. This meeting is being recorded and will be put on our YouTube channel. By staying in the meeting, you agree to be recorded. To speak in person, please raise your hand. On Zoom, please use the raise hand function or type an asterisk into the chat. The timekeeper is Joe Boyle. Please be mindful of time limits. The stacker is Marissa DuPont.
I'm online. Hello.
Step up and step back, and please speak slowly. Our agenda. Land acknowledgement. And where is that?
It's on the next.
Oh, okay. And intros, and then an introduce Solidarity Lowell news and committee updates. 5:50 we'll do allied organization updates. 6 o'clock we'll have an update on the document regarding the unhoused. At 6:05 our speaker will be Cassie Infante, statewide organizer for Abundant Housing Massachusetts, and we'll wrap up at 6:55. So the social distance hour, quarter hour. We'll take turns giving our name, pronouns, where we live, and our favorite part of spring. And I would like to introduce Zaida Ortiz first, a chair of progressiveness. We're honored to have her with us today. So thank you. Thank you.
I really just wanted to come up and, let you guys know that we, as a statewide organization, really value you guys. And I saw that you guys were talking about housing. So I was like, what a perfect excuse for me to show my gratitude for all the work you guys have been doing. Again, I know the work that Marissa and Caroline have done and all of you done during the pandemic. And I also kind of put organizing aside to, put out the fires that were happening locally. And I love that you guys are already like, boom, let's get back to it. Let's get back into it. And you've always been just such a solid group. So I just want to thank you all for that and show my appreciation. Zaida Ortiz, she, her, ella pronouns. I live in the main streets of Malden, Massachusetts, just down the street. And my favorite part of spring, I love when my daffodils start to sneak out of the dirt. It just reminds me of the old organizing saying, they might bury us, but we're seeds and we will grow. And honestly, I do believe that. Like when we push out of the soil, it's a struggle, but once you can reach the light and the sun. So thank you.
My name is Ron Peachtree. My pronouns are he, his, him. I live here in Lowell, about 2 miles that way. Favorite thing about spring, being able to take long walks without getting my feet wet in snow and ice.
Joe Boyle, he, him, the Navy Committee. So, I live in the Lowell Highlands, and my favorite thing about spring is my front porch.
Mitch Pollock. Historically, my favorite thing about spring,
Mitch, speak up.
Historically, my favorite thing about spring has been baseball. Still pissed about with the bets.
Same.
I'm Michelle, pronouns are she, her. I also live in the acre in Lowell, and my favorite thing about spring is more daylight. It's outside. The last time I was in this building, it was like midnight outside, so extra daylight is good.
Chris, pronouns she, her. Live in downtown Lowell. I'm also on the coordinating committee. You already took most of my favorite things about spring. I'll just say it's getting warmer, summer is coming up. I'm not a winter person, so any increase in day temperature or nighttime temperature, much appreciated.
Hey everybody, Caroline Snow, she, her pronouns. I live in Centerville, and my favorite part of spring is just warmer temperatures and more sunlight.
I'm Tom Barrington. I live in North Chelmsford, pronouns he, him. Daffodils has gotta be.
My name is Ryan Hammond. I live downtown. I have he, him pronouns. And my favorite part of spring is not needing to chip multiple centimeters of ice off of my windshield.
Amy Baranowski, she, her. I was gonna say the acre, but you said downtown and we live together, so sort of a cusp of the acre and downtown. Favorite part about spring, I'm gonna say, you live right on the Riverwalk and my desk is right by a window, and right outside the window, there is a Japanese cherry tree that will be blooming very soon.
I forgot to introduce myself.
Yeah, so it's a-
DLSAT, she, her. I live in the acre, and my favorite part of spring is the moderate temperatures and more light. You know, the online people? Marissa?
Hi, everyone. I'm Marissa DuPont. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I live in South Lowell. And my favorite part of spring is being able to put my bulky winter coat in the closet for the season. Switch to the spring jacket.
Can you introduce the rest of the?
Yep. Okay, Paul, you want to go next?
Hi, everyone. Paul Gaudette from the Highlands section. My pronouns are he, him. My favorite part of spring is the first warm enough day that I can put a chair on the porch and sit with a cold beverage and read a book.
Dennis?
Hi, everyone. My name is Dennis McCarthy. My pronouns are he, his, him, and I live in the Highlands as well. And my favorite part of spring, many things, but really it is getting out on the water, getting out on the Merrimack River and rowing in my rowing shell. I'm looking forward to that.
Eric?
Hi, my name's Eric Gitcher. I live in the Lower Highlands, and my favorite part of spring is the warm weather and seeing people get out of their homes.
Corey?
Hi, everyone. My name's Corey Robinson. He, him, his. My pronouns. I live in Centerville. And my favorite part of spring is being able to open up the windows and fill the house with fresh air.
Is Slideshow another person or is that someone in the room?
That's me.
Oh, okay. Linda.
Hi, my name is Linda. I live in downtown Lowell. My favorite part of spring is my birthday and seeing the buds on the trees come out.
Susie? She's driving, so maybe she can't unmute.
Hi, you call my name?
Yes.
Sorry.
Just introduce yourself.
My name is Susie Chun. Pronoun she, her. I live in South Lowell. There's several things I love about spring, but one thing is just being able to get rid of the winter gears. So thank you.
Back to you, Dee.
Slide. Land acknowledgement. Here on 10 Arlington Street in Drake, we stand on the land of the following nations: Wabanaki, Dawnland Confederacy, the Pennacook, Pentucket, Pawtucket, Agawam. This information is from native-land.ca. What is Solidarity Lowell? Solidarity Lowell is a volunteer-based group of community members of Greater Lowell working towards social justice by defending the human rights, dignity, and equality of all persons against hate and discrimination. We welcome new members. The SL Coordinating Committee is your elected team of volunteers running the meetings, organizing events, disseminating relevant news, and sharing calls to action. Coordinating committee elections are held in April. If you are interested in joining, Please contact us after the meeting to learn more. Progressive Massachusetts. Solidarity Lowell is a chapter of Progressive Massachusetts. Progressive Mass is it's hidden by the
Oh, got it.
Statewide. Yeah, it's a statewide member.
statewide member-driven grassroots organization committed to fighting for a vision of shared prosperity, racial and social justice, good government, and environmental sustainability in Massachusetts. Visit progressivemass.com or contact us after the meeting to learn more. Latest news, was passed, is Lobby Day is being held Thursday, April 13th, starting at 10 in room 428 of the State House in Boston. You can RSVP to attend that on the Progressive Mass website. There is a petition to extend eviction protections. And we're looking for signatures on that. Tell your legislators to prioritize and protect the revenue from the Fair Share Amendment. All of these items are in the news and alerts section on the Progressive Mass website. Victories. On March 16th, New Mexico governor signed a bill protecting access to reproductive and gender affirming care into law. Bucking a trend, Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer signed a bill expanding the state's civil rights law to prohibit discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity. On March 11th, at the International Women's Day event hosted by the Dwelling House of Hope, our own Chris Offerman received a Mighty Movers Women's dedication to creating positive change through her work in the community. Does anyone else have anything positive they'd like to share?
Speaking of Michigan, Michigan also passed a law repealing the so-called Right to Work Act, the first state to do this in 60 years.
Yes. John.
Last week, a few hundred residential assistants at Boston University organized and voted to join SCIU local 509.
Anybody online have?
No.
Okay. Elections Committee. Campaigns are looking for campaign managers and treasurers. If you're interested or know someone who is, please email lisa@solidaritylowell.com. The Latina and Hispanic community remains underrepresented in Lowell. Do you know anyone who might be interested in running? Email d@solidaritylowell.com. And we are looking to set up representative meetings in the 18th Middlesex House District. For more information, you can contact either Lisa Arnold at lisa@solidaritylowell.com or D Halzak at d@solidaritylowell.com.
I'll take this one, Dee. So I'm the volunteer coordinator for the Merrimack Valley Housing Project for Solidarity Lowell, the Merrimack Valley Interfaith Sanctuary Network. We're looking for support for our asylum seeker, Marius. He is from Togo. We've been assisting him since he arrived here in 2018. He and another asylum seeker, Lillian, who is from the Dominican Republic, they had a baby last year. The baby Yaira is in need of clothing, diapers, and gift cards, and these can be given to me. You can just email me to coordinate drop-off. And Marius will be speaking at the Andover Library's Courageous Conversation series in April, and I highly encourage everyone to attend if you have not heard his story already. It's pretty amazing.
I had a question, Marissa.
Yep.
How old is the child?
I don't even think she's 1 yet.
Okay. So like 3 to 6 month old close?
Yeah, little baby. I think she's size 6 diapers, but she could be the size up from that by now.
I have a group of moms that do this kind of stuff in.
Oh, that's awesome. Oh, this is me too.
Yeah, sorry.
That's okay. No worries. Okay, so unpacking whiteness. Individuals committed to exploring their own racial biases are invited to participate in the Unpacking Whiteness dialogue group. Engage in supportive, structured dialogues to explore whiteness in contemporary society, especially to better understand the legacy and impact of white supremacy, white privilege, explicit and implicit bias, systemic racism, and microaggressions. The dialogue group is 5 sessions. It's capped at 10 people. And after attending the dialogue group, attendees are invited to the ongoing group, which meets once a month and alternates between discussing a book or watching a film. And you can sign up at that bit.ly UW sign up. Or if you have questions, just email me, marissa@solidaritylowell.com.
Allied groups, updates and announcements. Does anybody have any information or events to share? Anybody online?
Nope.
Okay.
Oh, sorry.
Paul has his hand up, sorry.
So Merrimack Valley Project is looking to hire some new organizers. We had a good run with Walter and Trevor. Trevor's finishing the end of April. And question 1 on the Fair Share Amendment and the driver's license question 4 and the Wheels with Hope rides for people with substance use disorder. Been several successful campaigns that we've managed under their leadership. So we're starting a new chapter. We're hiring. We have 2 full-time positions open. And we're in the month of April, we'll be joining our sister organizations for a weekend training in Vermont, talking about just transition, point of theory of change and popular education. That's what's going on in MVP.
Is someone talking? We can't hear anything. We don't have sound right now.
It wasn't on.
That's better.
Yeah.
You can hear now?
Yep.
That's great. I was just seeing if there were any folks at the meeting that were planning on coming to the lobby day. And if not, again, I know it can be a bit of a hassle to drive from all the way over here to into town, find parking and all that. If you guys plan on making an appointment or an in-district meeting, I'd love to know about it and just, see if, keep an eye out for any of you guys that are planning on coming down. And the other thing I wanted to talk about, which is kind of aligns with your Unpacking Whiteness work, we're hoping to do, I'm not sure if anybody attended the Thursday meeting for Progressive Mass, but we are planning to do some racial equity work this year. That's one of my goals taking on. And again, I'm really impressed that you guys are already doing that work here. What we are hoping to do is work with CCI, which is organization in Boston. They're going to be having an online event in May that specifically is geared towards white people, organizing against anti-fascist. I'm like, wait, can I say that word here? I can't say that word here. I can use all the buzzwords here and nobody's going to be offended. Sorry, I had to remember who my audience is. kind of confronting and tactics, how to de-escalate fascism and things like that, specifically around school committee meetings. I don't know if you guys are having any PRT issues up here, but a lot of the South Shore chapters are. So we're going to be doing that. And also a lot of the South Shore chapters are noticing that there are people specifically running to try to ban books. So this thing that we're partnering with, this event that we're partnering with, will be about the end of May. I think it's May 23rd or so, but once I keep an eye out, I'll send out the information once we have it finalized. And it will be a 4-hour training. Unfortunately, because we are paying people of color, we are paying them. Cost will be $100 for our members. I'm trying to negotiate. I have to wait till the next board meeting, but I want to negotiate scholarships for people who it's not, an obtainable thing. And so just stay tuned if you're interested, and you guys definitely are a group of people that are interested in doing this kind of dismantling of white supremacy. I would love to see you all here, there. Thank you.
Thank you. Is that it?
Marissa's nodding.
Okay, I'm like, where? I don't see them.
Yes, no one has their hands up here.
Oh, sorry, yeah, you're waiting in there.
Unhoused document, next steps. Please sign the citizens requested changes to Lowell homeless liaison protocol at bit.ly/unhoused-petition. You can sign as an individual and or as an organization. The deadline for signing is April 3rd. After that, we notify the media and city council, as well as the director of homelessness initiatives. Bring to city council as a citizen's petition to adopt community developed standards. We will announce the date for that. And our speaker of the evening is Cassie Infante, Abundant Housing Massachusetts statewide organizer. In the past, Cassie worked at the Black Economic Council of Massachusetts, where she managed the Black Mass Coalition of statewide leaders committed to putting actionable progress behind the Black Lives Matter statement. She grew up in the city of Lawrence, where she is a former elected school committee member and veteran educational justice advocate. In her role at AHMA, Cassie works with pro-housing advocates across Massachusetts. As statewide organizer at AHMA, Cassie will help grow the movement by identifying and activating pro-housing change makers and building grassroots pro-housing organizations in all corners of the Commonwealth. Welcome, Cassie.
Cassie said she would sign. That must be her. I can't see if you might just sign out.
There she is.
Yep.
Yep, there she is.
Cassie
Perfect.
is here.
Say something.
Yeah.
Can you hear us, Cassie?
Not yet.
She's still connecting to audio. Oh, there she goes. Hi, Cassie, welcome.
Hi.
You're just in time. We just introduced you.
Oh, perfect. Hi, everyone. Good evening. Thank you for inviting me. Oh,
Do you have a slideshow?
I do. Give me one moment here. And I just want to see the folks in the space. Hi, everyone. It's great to see you and great to meet you. I'm Cassie. Give me just one moment here to get my slides up.
Can have two sharers at the same time. So we have to stop sharing.
There we go.
There we go.
Great. Okay, can you see my slides?
Yes.
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. Great. Well, hi everyone. It's great to meet you and thank you so much for the invitation. It sounds like you learned a little bit about me, but I definitely want to formally introduce myself as well. My name is Cassie Infante. I use she, her pronouns, and I help lead organizing and operations at Abundant Housing, Massachusetts, which I'll share more about in just a moment. But just to give you some more background into who I am, I'm from Lawrence, and so Lowell is near and dear to my heart. I have a lot of friends and family in Lowell as well, but I actually live in Haverhill now. And my background is really in education and racial justice organizing. So I'm actually a formerly elected school committee member in my hometown of Lawrence. And I got my master's degree in education policy. And so I recently, made my way to housing advocacy work here in the last 2 years, because like education, I'm sure many of you can relate, housing is just so essential to our collective well-being, and it really is the foundation for everyone. And so I was really passionate about that. And I've been here at AMA for about 1.5 years. And so at Abundant Housing, we have a mission statement like so many nonprofits. We are a nonprofit, but our motto is Massachusetts is for everyone. But we recognize that that reality is so far from what's happening. But we stand up for housing in all communities across Massachusetts, abundant and affordable housing. And we do that by driving policy at the state and local level. And so what we do is we work one-on-one with primarily housing advocates who are in their hometown, showing up at planning board and city councilor meetings, defending the affordable housing project and whatnot. And we also connect folks to statewide action. So we have an annual statewide policy agenda. This year we wrote our first bill. And so we also recognize the need for deeper systemic statewide work. And so we connect our members to that. Why do we do this work? There's a really deep housing problem in Massachusetts. We are one of the least affordable places to live in the country in terms of housing. We also have some of the lowest vacancy rates for rentals. And so there really just aren't enough housing options. And even if we are housed, many of us are cost burdened by housing. So we're spending more than 30% of our income on housing. And so these sort of figures that you see here are basically media snippets that we've seen. And I think in these last couple of years, it's been particularly concentrated, and the crisis has gotten to a scale of proportions that we've never seen before. But I think that these two headlines are really, really show the scale of the problem. The one on the right in particular is that Massachusetts continues to grow in population. However, we are not permitting the same amount of homes, especially affordable homes, at the rates that we need to accommodate this growth. And we're also increasing in the amount of jobs and economic development, but not necessarily matching that. And so, for us at Abundant Housing Massachusetts, we understand that the affordability crisis is really at the root driven by the lack of housing, the deficit of housing supply. And so what that does is it creates a situation where higher income individuals are always going to bid out, or they're competing with lower income individuals for a very small amount of units. Because again, we're not building enough homes. And so for us, we really focus on what's a part of the problem, that's the housing supply crisis or housing deficit. And that's really getting at the root of the fact that there isn't enough rental housing, as evidenced by the lack of vacancy rates. There's not enough naturally occurring affordable housing. So what I mean by that is housing that can be afforded basically something that isn't a large lot, single family home, and that costs $1 million, something more naturally occurring affordable. There also isn't enough affordable subsidized housing. And what we're seeing is a particular crisis for lower income and increasingly even middle income or lower to middle income families and individuals. And so again, for us, we really focus on this housing supply issue. And the way that this shows up in communities across Massachusetts, because Massachusetts is a very parochial state, we are very much in favor of local control. And I think, even across the country, the way that land use decisions have happened historically is that localities really use various enforcements, including environmental regulations, to really throttle the production of housing development. And what that does is actually make the development that does happen more expensive. And so the more regulations there are and the more sort of meetings and legislation at the local level that developments have to go through, often that tends to make them more expensive. And so I'm going to talk a little bit more about other facets of the housing crisis, but I really wanted to contextualize our work in this first. And of course, we'll have room for discussion and questions at the end. And so for us, how do we address these things? Well, our vision is to create, sustain, and enhance abundant housing for all. We want a housing market that lets people move when they want to, where they want to, and not when they have to. And so we want communities with racially and economically diverse residents. We also want to do that in a climate resilient ways. So we want development patterns that facilitate low or no carbon lifestyles. And we also want to educate and organize more around the history of racial segregation, particularly when it comes to land use and housing. And how does that translate into our policy agenda? Well, we are advocates for the following policies that you see on the screen. And so we want more housing near transit and jobs. We need robust tenant protections to prevent displacement. And so I think this is really unique about the work that we do at Abundant Housing, is that we do focus on tenant protections as well. We don't see that as mutually exclusive from our housing supply and production work. And the way that this has looked like in a city like Lawrence or in gateway cities, for example, is that we focus on tenant protections to really combat the eviction crisis, which I think has also been acute in the last couple of years. Not I think, I know. And this has looked like educational workshops and technical assistance, direct assistance to families in partnership with Example for Lawrence High School. We did an education series for undocumented parents in partnership with local CDCs that really talked about knowing your rights and also connecting folks to immediate resources that they needed. And so that is another really important part of our work. We also advocate for the reform of exclusionary zoning rules. And the reason that's in red is because we're launching a new organizing and education program this year that I will get into here in just a moment. But we also are advocates for, again, sustainable communities and development practices, robust funding of social and subsidized housing. So moving right along here, I just want to further contextualize why zoning is really important and why we are doing the work of zoning reform. And it's largely because even 50 years after the passage of the Fair Housing Act at the federal level, Massachusetts is still largely segregated by income and race. And a big part of that can really be blamed on what Professor Richard Rothstein calls de jure segregation by design, which is exclusionary zoning. And what is zoning? Well, zoning is the system of land use regulations that define what kind of building or use can be built on a plot of land. And in the early 1900s, zoning really became a valuable tool of segregationist efforts to legally enforce separation. And so early zoning laws, for example, explicitly forbade African Americans from living in certain places, and really only allowed them to live in designated areas. And so much of this was reinforced by what folks might know of as redlining. And that's not even to mention discrimination in the housing, in the mortgage lending process. But this is a really important history to know. And so, because we live in a divided and unequal region, many of the things we place value on are distributed based on where we live. And this map that you see here was developed by the Kirwan Institute from Ohio State. And basically, they are showing us that opportunities are really disparate based on where you live. And so they define high opportunity as having access to health, wealth, and education outcomes, such as your probability of having a college degree. And so, as you can see, sort of the suburbs that are around Greater Boston, for example, can be defined as very high opportunity in this instance. And these are the same suburbs that historically have kept certain types of housing, thereby certain types of people out of their neighborhoods. And I just want to check the chat because I see, okay, there's a question. Oh yeah, you can jump right in with questions if you'd like.
I didn't want to interrupt you.
Sure, no, go right ahead.
Hi, I'm Ron Peastree. The redlining, of course, is now illegal. So what are these people using instead to get the same effects? What kind of rules are in those exclusionary things that they can get away with legally that are doing the same things?
Absolutely, that's a great question. I would say I would say not allowing multifamily housing is a great proxy for racial and class segregation because, and I'm gonna actually talk about this as we go on in the slides, but single family zoning it makes up about a third of our state, which means you can only build large lot single family homes that are more expensive to build and therefore more expensive to buy. And what that means is that only folks from a certain, wealthy and only wealthy folks can buy those homes. And so for me, cities and towns that reinforce single family zoning and don't allow multifamily zoning, which by the way, that doesn't just include sort of a large apartment building, market rate apartment building, that includes affordable housing, that includes social housing. And so what we're seeing is more and more cities and towns are maintaining the zoning that is very exclusive. And so in that way, it really can be seen as modern redlining, if you will, or a ramification of redlining. And I'm gonna talk more about that. Thank you so much for that question. And feel free to, exactly, Belvedere. Yes, Marissa, I know, yep. Thanks for saying that. Feel free to jump in with any other questions, but I think I am going to also speak to some of these as we keep going. And so, okay, so I'm gonna move us along here, and I think this speaks exactly to the question that was just asked. What is the state of multifamily zoning? As of right now, 1/3 of Massachusetts communities do not have a single district in which multifamily housing can be built. And so what happens is, and so this map, let me not get ahead of myself. This map shows you what's allowed by right, by permit, and what's not allowed at all. And what I want you to know is that if a development project is by right, that doesn't mean that it sort of gets automatically approved. It still needs to go through a city council process and a community input process, but it's already written into the zoning. By permit typically adds months to years of extensive processes that adds fees to the cost of housing. And so what we really want is to make multifamily housing by right. That does not mean that there's going to be like an influx of development overnight. It still, again, has to go through several processes. But I want to show you this to really clarify the scale of the problem, because what we're seeing, right, is that if only certain parts of Lowell or Lawrence, and I'll speak for Lawrence because I'm from there, and so much of Lawrence is multifamily housing. If we're the only places building that type of housing, then it really relegates lower income people. It really limits us to those neighborhoods, which, again, thinking about the opportunity maps is not fair. It's not equitable. And so I want to speak to, was it Ron that asked that question? Because that was a good question. The reason, so Katie Einstein from Boston University and Maxwell Palmer did a study called Neighborhood Defenders. And what they showed was that the people who sort of overwhelmingly decide by proxy of public participation what development happens in their communities tend to not be representative of the community writ large. And so it tends to be mostly homeowners. It tends to be mostly older white men. And what happens is that for the most part, they tend to say no to new housing. So even if it's affordable, even if it's like subsidized social housing that the community desperately needs, most of the time, they just don't want any change in their neighborhood. And so that was a study that was done through Boston University. And so that's really what we're focused on. And I'm sorry, I'm going on and on. I'm going to keep going. I get really passionate about all of this. Okay, so what might a solution look like? Well, last year, Massachusetts passed one of the most comprehensive zoning reform bills of the last 20 years. And so we really excitingly have an opportunity to rectify some of these historical wrongdoings. And so the law is called the MBTA Communities Law. And what this law does is that it requires 175 communities across Massachusetts, and this does not include Boston. It requires that these communities zone for at least one multifamily zoning district. And this district has to be within a half mile of transit. And why is this law important? Well, you know, it's important that we redress the legacies of historical exclusion we're talking about. So expanding where multifamily housing goes means that more people have options to move in different places. It's climate resilient because it's promoting transit-oriented development. And it also includes an affordability requirement if communities wish to adopt that. So it really does give communities flexibility. Thank you, Dennis, for that. Northampton changed all single family, and Arlington is looking at adopting the same. Arlington is doing some really interesting things. Absolutely. We worked with a few folks in Arlington. Thank you for sharing that. And so this ensures also that every community is doing their part, right? That home creation and production is spread across transit accessible locations and not just concentrated in urban core communities. Because if we think about where those opportunity maps are, we think about places like Arlington, actually. We think about Wellesley, Newton, these places that have really amazing, wealthy school districts, for example. And that we want more folks to have access to. And they can't have that access if we don't build housing that's accessible to them in those areas. And so this is a map that shows all of the communities. Lowell is a community that's affected by this law. Now, Lowell is an example of a community that may already comply with this law, right? Because Lowell is relatively dense. Lowell has a good amount of multifamily housing. And I don't know for certain if it complies, but it might. Did someone want to say something?
Yeah, I wanted to add a point on that question. Lowell recently made a relatively minor zoning change to its downtown mixed use district, which eliminated parking requirements and thereby brought itself into into conformance with this law. It already had, it already had a big, dense urban multifamily district near, that was its downtown and near the train station. And they, with some relatively minor zoning changes, they've brought that district into conformance with the state law. And it's
Oh, that's great.
allow all kinds of projects. There was one sizable affordable housing project that was dead in the water. It was an expansion of a building that second, in addition to a building that already exists. It was dead in the water because it wasn't going to be able to meet parking requirements, and now it's not going to have to meet parking requirements.
Wow. That's great. Thank you so much for sharing that. I didn't know all of that, those updates. And I think the mention of parking is really important because often sort of adding more parking can make the housing development or make housing more expensive. And that's sort of a part of this work that doesn't get talked about often is sort of the parking debacle. And I think in walkable, transit-oriented communities like Lowell, hopefully we have less of a need for parking, but that is a really important part of the policy. So thank you. I'm going to move us along here because I think I've been talking for more than 10 minutes, which is what I think I was allotted. So I'm gonna keep moving here. And so, what's next? What are we doing in terms of this law and hoping and really working with communities to comply? We want, like Lowell, we want every community to comply with this law. I think what's important to name is that zoning does not automatically lead to production, right? Zoning is really the first step to enable production. And I think that's the hard part, is that this can often take years when we have, folks who need housing today or tomorrow. And so I think that's a tension of this work that I want to talk about a little bit later. And I'd love to hear everyone's thoughts on. But when it comes to this MBTA communities law, we are launching and organizing an education campaign that's basically going to, educate and build public support for multifamily housing, build more awareness around this history that we're talking about, because it isn't common knowledge. It's often relegated to, universities and gate kept in certain places. So it's really an education focused campaign. And we will do some lobbying to get to compliance. There is a lot of local pushback. And so, but, there is hope. Of the 175 communities, there's only, I think, 3 that have not complied to date in terms of completing the initial step. And I think, everything we're talking about, communities really being resistant to change, is at play here. But we're really hopeful. We are going to be primarily grassroots focused, which I know Solidarity Lowell knows a lot about. We're going to be canvassing, door knocking, phone banking. We are going to host forums, educational forums and discussions. We'll be doing persuasion training. So really helping advocates like yourselves, really building their capacity to make the case to their elected officials that we need housing. And so we're going to be doing all of that. And I'll definitely, we can continue that conversation if it's something that any of you are interested in. I only have 2 more slides. This one is legislation that we wrote this year in partnership with Representative Vargas and Senator Honan. And it's called an act to promote Yes in My Backyard. That was a name that Representative Vargas chose. But basically, one of the things that it will do is provide a statewide housing production target for affordable and workforce housing. We've always known as a state that we have a deficit. However, we've never clarified what the number of housing units is that we need, and we've never set goals for that. And so that's what we're trying to accomplish with this. It would also expand the MBTA communities law statewide, so including Berkshire's, Cape Cod region, further west, all the areas that aren't touched in that photo I showed a little bit earlier would also be required to allow multifamily zoning. It would also legalize accessory dwelling units by right, which I believe you all probably know, I know Lowell was considering an ADU ordinance. Would love to hear about that if folks have information. We just in Haverhill legalized ADUs by right, but this is a really sort of gentle way to add some housing stock to a community with in-law sort of apartments. It's way too hard to do that in communities as right now. It would also prioritize state-owned land for affordable housing. So turning sort of vacant commercial lots, turning that into residential use to really create more housing. And also allow inclusionary zoning by simple majority. So inclusionary zoning is basically a bylaw that bakes in affordability requirements. So it will often say something like, when a developer is building a new apartment building, 10% at the very minimum have to be affordable, which means they have to be subsidized, and they'll have AMI requirements. So I'm sorry if I'm repeating things that folks already know. I just find this content to be quite dense, and housing policy is overcomplicated, so I tend to over-explain. And so this is the legislation that we're really prioritizing this year, but we are also supporting tenant protection and anti-displacement measures and other bills, but this is the bill that we wrote. Finally, I want to come back to that. Finally, I want to share 2 resources with all of you. Thank you so much for saying take my time. I appreciate that. I want to share 2 resources because when I got the invitation to speak here, I was shared a story about something that happened in Lowell recently with unsheltered folks and really the dialogue being around homelessness. And I realized that most, if not all of my presentation was void of that topic. And one of the things that one of the learning resources that has been really fruitful for me is this report from the Othering and Belonging Institute. They are from UC Berkeley. There's this report called Deconstructing the Housing Crisis. And this report really folds back all the layers of just how deep our housing crisis is and how it actually is 13 different crises. And so there's a cluster of dysfunctions and disturbing circumstances happening in housing, some of which are related and some of which are not, some of which are only partially related. I say that because there's a section within this piece of work that talks about how building more affordable housing is important and necessary, but not sufficient to solving homelessness. And it talks about how we need to build more permanent supportive housing, which is not the same thing as affordable housing. We need more income assistance, so we need more funding for income assistance, and we also need more funding for case management and healthcare services, particularly around mental health and substance abuse prevention. And so I want to just name that because that is something that is not necessarily directly addressed in our work. And that's a tension that we hold and we support that work. But I just want to name that these issues feel so integrated, and yet there's often other policy priorities that we need to really prioritize. And I would say funding, resources, and the supportive housing is really important. And yet they are also related in the sense that if a permanent housing solution was brought to your city council, it would go through the same approval process that neighborhood defenders, in many cases would likely say no to, or sort of pressure your city council to say no to. And so we still need to really show up and support housing at the local level. And I will drop this resource in the chat as soon as I'm done sharing my screen, because I think it's a really great learning resource to learn about the intricacies of housing and the complexity of all the policies we need. The one other resource I want to share is Housing Navigator. Is there anyone in here that's ever heard of Housing Navigator? No, okay. Oh, I see one person's hand. Awesome. Housing Navigator is basically the Zillow of affordable housing. That's kind of the easiest way I can describe it. There are housing opportunities that are available immediately. And then there are also there are wait lists and other sort of resources for folks that are looking for something that's not necessarily market rates or not looking to buy a home. And it's a resource that was just started a couple of years ago, and I have found it to be really helpful. And so I think even if you wanted to share it with your listserv or put it on your website, I just think it's statewide and it's a really great resource. And so I'm just looking at the chat. Oh, what is accessible dwelling units? Thank you for that question. I hope I answered it. Let me know if I didn't. Permanent supportive housing. Yes, 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 yes. Okay, I think these are my last two slides. Maybe I said 2 slides and I meant 3. Okay, these are ways that if you wanted to plug into our work, we would more than welcome you to do that. We would ask your legislator to co-sponsor our priority bill that I just outlined. We have a really easy letter writing campaign and action network that I can share to allow you to do that. If you were interested, it sounds like Lowell already complies with the MBTA communities law, so maybe we won't be doing a full campaign on that. But if you wanted to host, a forum at the library, if you wanted to invite Abundant Housing to lead a conversation, we can do that. I think the third point is the most important bullet point, which is to the extent that you are available, I would really encourage you to show up to City Council. And also I saw that like Lowell has a housing subcommittee council. I would really support you in showing up and showing your support for housing projects, particularly affordable housing projects or projects that have any layer of affordability, because any new housing we desperately need. And of course, you are a community member in Lowell and you know what's best for your own community. So you can make the choices, you can, choose to support the projects that you wish. But every time, for example, I live in Haverhill, I just really started showing up and the mayor said to me, you are the first person I've showed up that's ever spoken in favor of housing. And it was in relation to making accessory dwelling units easier to build in Haverhill. And so that was it was motivating, but also disconcerting. But that's for me, one of the most actionable steps you can take in your own community. And then of course, there's many ways to stay in touch with us. You can sign up to get our newsletter at abundanthousingmass.org. You can also follow us on any of these social media channels, and you can also email me. So I will put all of that information into the chat as well.
Can we get this slide deck?
Yes, you absolutely can. I'm going to actually, that's a great point. If I share the slide deck, you'll have every single link. So I'll do all of the above.
Cassie, Corey Robinson just asked a question in the chat.
Hi, Corey. Okay, are there shared utility requirements in Haverhill's ADU policy? Oh, I actually do not know the answer to that, but I will find out and get back to you, Corey, if you don't mind. I can either share the information with, I think Chris is the person that emailed me, or if you want to share your contact information with me, I can get back to you. I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to that.
Any other questions?
Thank you, Corey.
Done to get the upper 20%, upper 25% of the socioeconomic ladder communities involved in this. Similar efforts in the past that did not involve Newton and Lincoln and et cetera, were much less effective because those people weren't on board. If people in the lower 1/5 are where all this work is being done, it sort of gets hamstrung, it seems.
It's true. It's true. I would agree with that. And I think, I think that the work looks different depending on the community that you're in and what the needs of the community are. You know, I talked about earlier in Lawrence, you know, so much of our work has been more around tenant protections and anti-displacement work, because that seems to be the need, and that's what has sort of rose up naturally in our partnerships with the community development corporations, and the more direct services organizations, right? So the folks that are, for example, sort of implementing RAFT and the rental assistance and things like that. And then in a place, you know, in a place like Newton, it is about opening up the community and opening up the zoning so that we can create more opportunities there. So that if someone from Lawrence or Lowell wanted to move there, they have the opportunity, and it's not just that they only have the option of buying $1 million single family home, because that's really what it looks like right now. Okay, I think Paul had his hand up first, and then Dennis.
Yep.
Yes, thank you. Haverhill is one of the 3 chapters of Merrimack Valley Project, and on March 7th, they had a city council hearing around housing policy, and 2 of our members spoke, but I was impressed that the mayor was the main speaker and was advocating for more projects with, you know, a certain percentage of affordable units. And they didn't kill it. There was a lot of discussion, and they sent it to subcommittee looking for that sweet spot about, you know, what can you demand of a developer that doesn't scare them away and is a contribution to a housing fund an acceptable alternative to actually building the units. So I know I'm just impressed that Cassie, that you're living in Haverhill, so you'll be right on top of this, I'm sure. And we're watching it at MVP as well.
Thank you so much, Paul. I would love to get involved with MVP if there's an opportunity. We just at Abundant Housing, we just hired 2 more organizers. And so I'm going to really be shifting my attention to more Merrimack Valley focused work, which is exciting. The mayor has already brought me into the Board of Appeals. So the mayor is a great ally in terms of housing. I'm sad that he's not running for re-election, but I'm excited at the prospects. And yes, I think that's a great example. Thank you for naming it. I think so much of the dialogue around housing does not happen at the regional level. It tends to really be locality by locality. And I think that's why we need MVP, and we need spaces like this to really have that cross collaboration.
And one term that I found very helpful was workforce housing, because they're saying we're not talking about low income, we're not talking about, you know, these giant projects that nobody wants, but it's people who are going to be working in the community.
Exactly. I think that's a really great point. And also, you know, I tried to do this in my presentation, being really clear about what I mean by affordable housing, because there is also so many, you know, we all sort of have a different perception of what is affordable. And I think that that's a big part of our work at the root, is that we know, and there is research that when you have enough housing to really meet the population's needs, it really kind of makes it more equitable and it lowers the overall cost. And so that's what we're focused on. However, as I mentioned, that's not the only solution. We need so many others, I think particularly around the funding. But yes, I will pause here and go to Dennis.
My question is really about trying to convince city councilors to adopt affordable ADU housing ordinances. We just had a very disappointing subcommittee meeting this past week, where several councilors spoke against the ordinance. And it seemed as though there was a fear that there would be a run on properties that would be in single families that would then turn into 2 families, and there would be just a situation created in the city where it would be a little less suburban in nature, and too much parking, too much congestion, and property values would change, and maybe affordable housing wouldn't be the goal. I might be speaking a little too general here about those problems, but I know there was a group that went to Montreal, which has a tremendous ADU program. And I know ADUs exist in a lot of other places. I was wondering if there's a database that we could tap into that shows how successful ADUs are in helping to mitigate this problem with affordability. Because the more we have affordable housing, the more we have housing, the pressure on the rents to go up will be decreased. And the more we have housing that's smaller units, it just seems like it makes a lot of sense. But I was just wondering if you could bring a little science to it to help counselors feel more comfortable with the ordinance.
Yes, thank you so much, Dennis, for naming that, because I would say it was the exact same thing in Haverhill. We just passed a by right ordinance literally last month. But in the months before that, there was a lot of hesitation and trepidation for most of our council. And to be honest, I really think that was because they were mostly only hearing from homeowners who were opposed to this, and not necessarily from the folks that would benefit from or are in support. So I think the first thing is, like, definitely everyone here should make their voice heard and talk directly to their counselors in support of this. I would say that ADUs are frankly on the verge of being legalized statewide. It's a part, not only is it a part of our priority legislation, there are also 3 other bills written at the State House right now that if it weren't for the rebate tax issue that happened last year, likely would have been passed. There's a lot of popular support at the state level for this. And in the last 4 years, I know off the top of my hand, Arlington, Wellesley, Reading, there are several Salem, Massachusetts, several communities that have adopted a by right ADU ordinance. It's growing in popularity, and it's growing in popularity because the evidence does truly support that adding ADUs to an existing community or an existing overlay does not affect or negatively affect property values. It does not. There are many ways to make it so that it does not change the existing character of a community. You can build an ADU in a basement. You can build an ADU in an existing garage. You can build an ADU that really fits the character of the existing neighborhood. And there are so many levers that a community can use to really make the ordinance fit their needs. And I'm gonna find, there's some great research from Amy Dane on the state of accessory dwelling units and the positive benefits. I'm gonna find that and send your way. I don't have all of it memorized, but what I will say is that the talking points and the stories that folks shared in places like Lowell and Wellesley, because I was a part of those conversations, are really about the fact that we have college students that want to come back home and can't because there isn't anywhere for them to live. We have elders who wish to age in place and they can't because there aren't sufficient options in our community that meet these varying lifestyles. There just aren't. And ADUs are a very smart growth, reasonable approach to give homeowners the flexibility to add existing, to add housing for their loved ones. It's really a way to house loved ones. One of the things that Haverhill was considering was Haverhill was talking about a relative requirement, or you had to require that it was a relative. And that was really quickly shot down because there's really no way that you can prove, unless you do a blood or DNA test, but that's really out of the question. And so we had a lot of conversations. It does take a long time. I would say, don't give up hope. Tell your city councilors that you support this. And I will send you resources and talking points. I hope that answered your question. I know it was not sort of hard data, but it is something that's increasingly being used as a tool to at least do something to address the housing shortage.
Joe?
Thanks. I'm Joe Boyle. I'm on the coordinating committee. I also have my master's degree in regional planning. And from my point of view, as a Lowellian, the affordable housing crisis, the housing affordability crisis, is something that's largely been dumped onto us from the suburban communities in Eastern Massachusetts. We're not the ones who squeezed the housing supply. This city's been pro-housing for decades. We're not the ones who are afraid of constructing affordable housing. We've got great affordable housing projects being built almost yearly in this city. And yeah, we have some things to work on, like the ADU, but next to the ADU, the fact that we were already, even before the MBTA zoning, basically in compliance with the MBTA zoning. And we have a very pro-affordable housing leadership in this city. And I guess my question is, do you have a model where people from Lowell can be useful in bringing about changes in the suburbs where the problem's really from?
Thank you so much, because I agree with you. You know, I'm from Lawrence. I think, you know, there are some similarities between Lawrence and Lowell, and I agree with you. So I would say two things. Right now, the best thing, the sort of our one pathway to action is really supporting the statewide legislation that would expand the MBTA law. It would set a production target. It would, you know, legalize ADUs. That's really important to support and make sure that the Lowell delegation is supporting that. The second thing is, we don't have it set up right now, but we are going to in the next 3 to 6 months. We are going to have sponsor citywide, city and town-wide canvases, phone banks, and text campaigns, where we will need many volunteers. And so to the extent that you are interested and available and have a few hours to spare, probably on weekends is when we'll host those. If you can't physically be present, you can do it from home. We're going to set that up. That's something that we could really use your support on, and I will absolutely reach out. I will reach back out to all of you and see if you're interested. We right now are focusing initially our campaign on 13 communities. I don't have the full list memorized, but I know off the top of my head it's going to be Brookline, Arlington, Newton, Franklin, Norwood, Gloucester, and I'm forgetting, I should have them all memorized, I'm sorry. But that's just a sample of the communities we're focusing on. And that's because there's a variety of factors why we chose those communities. We already have sort of a budding pro-housing group or volunteers and advocates there. But there's some, like Gloucester, where there's not many folks, or Franklin, for example. So if you're interested in coming to Franklin, in these cities and towns that, to your point, I think your name is Ron, to your point, haven't historically done their part and have historically really been exclusive, that's going to be your most direct path of action. So thank you for asking that, because I'll definitely make sure to send that information when it's available. Oh, okay, let me read Corey's question. Okay, certain sections of Lowell need market rate disposable income properties to offset the volume of subsidized, as well as spur economic growth and serving these areas, I think is what is meant to be said. They are saturated with fast food, laundromats, liquor stores, and pawn shops. What are your thoughts? I think this is a really good opportunity this is a planning problem. And I would be interested in leveraging the expertise in the room if anyone else has thoughts on this. But for me, this is an opportunity to get involved in your city's master planning process, because there is a disconnect, it seems, between what should really be residential versus what should be commercially zoned. I think that economic development and growth is important, of course. Right, balance, exactly. We need the balance. Economic development is important, but often there's a real mismatch where the housing is and sort of where services are. And so I think to the extent that you can be a part of your really building relationships with your planning department, I would encourage everyone here, just even meeting with them and sharing what's important to you. You don't have to be an expert in housing to do this, to talk to your planning department, but even like sharing sort of these ideas and talking about the areas that you're seeing this concentrated in and talking about where housing can go in your community, if any, is important. So those are just some of my initial thoughts, Corey. Thanks for sharing that.
Sean Grossman has a question.
Yeah, first, before I get to my question, just my personal involvement with this issue is I'm one of the people Joe Boyle was complaining about. I moved to Lowell in order to find affordable housing. I lived in Dorchester. My family lived in Dorchester. Our kids grew up. They wouldn't move out. They couldn't find a place they could afford to live. We needed like a wall between us and them, so we were looking for a two-family, and we couldn't find one we could afford in Boston, where we had lived for over 20 years, and they'd all grew up and everything. And I never had thought of moving here, but we kept circling wider and wider circles around Boston, trying to find a place to live, and our realtor who was helping us to look for a place was going to fire us, and so we went further out, and we ended up here, which I'm very happy about. I love living here. But and now I have my daughter and grandson living with us, and this whole ADU thing, the sort of fantasy that we already have ADUs. The only difference between my house and an ADU is a wall and a separate entrance, which nobody would ever notice except for those of us living there. But I have a question on a slightly different angle. One of the things that we're all concerned about, and you mentioned earlier, is sustainability. And now there's some conflict at times between what you might call the sustainability or climate community and the affordable housing community. Because the sustainability folks, which I'm one of, and so is many people in this room and on this call, want to see that new housing, when it's built, be built to zero carbon standards and not have gas hookups and things like that. And we run into all kinds of opposition to this, but one of the sources of opposition is people who say, well, if you do that, you can't build as much affordable housing. And there are people who dispute that in terms of what is possible. And I'm not an expert on it, although there might be some on this call. But I'm curious if you have thoughts about how the two communities can work together, because as you mentioned, is one of the missions of your group. We don't just need, we need affordable housing, and we also need sustainability. So how do we give it to both?
Thank you so much for sharing your story, for starters. I would say I certainly am not an expert either. I have so much to learn with the sustainable development practices, because unfortunately, we've heard a lot of the same things. I think particularly from developers, which is, making a project sort of more sustainable or zero carbon. I think that's a great example. Will make it sort of economically unfeasible to follow through on. And I think that's the argument we hear often. And so one of the things that we try to do to combat that and to make housing more affordable to develop, and therefore more affordable to the people that will live in the house or buy the house or rent the house, is, if we can't control the cost of land, then let's at least control the cost of the actual permitting process. And the reality is, and I think this is just something that's not known. I didn't know about it before I started working for ALMA. The reality is that when a housing project goes through a lengthy permitting process, there are legal fees that get added. There's like building inspectors that need to be paid over time. There's so much added fees that really amount to really adding immensely to the project, the cost. That doesn't directly address your question, or doesn't directly address the need for sustainability. I think we need to address why is it that it's so sort of quote unquote expensive to do this, or why is it that we're saying it's not feasible when it probably is, because so much of what we determine to be feasible is really political will. If I'm being honest, it's political will. And I think, and so the answer, so for us, it's like, okay, what can we influence to make less costly? And also, for us, the transit-oriented development is really important. We talk a lot about walkable communities and lowering our dependency on vehicles. Someone mentioned parking requirements. Oftentimes, parking requirements will literally stop housing from being built, because we're prioritizing, frankly, parking in cars over housing. And sometimes when we have limited space, we have to make the decision to go with housing over parking. And that's literally sort of the either or that I think those things get pinned into, unfortunately. The last thing I'll say is we are trying really hard to build deeper relationships with the larger environmental and climate justice organizations in the state. So for example, Environmental League of Massachusetts, we're working with them right now to be in our coalition. New England Clean Energy Council. And so a big part of it is like, if AMA is saying we are not the experts in this, we need to find the experts and get their opinion. And maybe that looks like adding an addendum to our existing bill, right? Our priority bill around sustainability requirements in development. So not a full and complete answer to your question, but you're making me think a lot about what can be done and the ongoing tension of what we're trying to do. So I hope that answered a little bit. Thank you for your question.
Dennis has been waiting patiently to ask a question, and that this needs to be our last question.
Actually, I'm sorry. What I wanted to do is just add to the answer for that last question, because I'm an architect who's had 2 successful retrofits. And I know a developer that's doing retrofits now in the city with net zero as the goal. I live in a house that's 1892 that we renovated 2 years ago. Spray foam's required now for our values in the roof, especially for R40s with 6-inch studs. And once you do that, you may as well do the walls. You can get to net zero as we did here with a solar panel array, the foam that's insulation that's required by code. And then heat pumps have a $10,000 rebate now. So in mass save. So it's not difficult to get to net zero. We have electric cars here. It's easy to do charging. It really is not a heavy lift. In fact, we're even getting assistance through CTI with a rental property to do heat pumps and extra insulation in that property. So even groups that are helping affordability for tenants are supporting us in retrofitting from gas to electric and over insulating the property. So I'm just saying there's a lot of success going on right now with getting to net zero, me personally, as well as other developers in the city. It's not a heavy lift.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dennis. I really appreciate that. I learned too, because, I think it goes back to that. It's a matter of political will, and not so much of feasibility so often. So thank you.
Okay. That wraps up the speaker portion of our evening. On the next slide.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed our time together. I'm more than happy to come back anytime. I think, Paul, I might reach out to you to get involved with MVP. And I'm happy to share any resources maybe that aren't in the chat. It should all be in the presentation, but feel free to reach out anytime.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just before we get to that, there's still a vote to be taken at city council, right, on ADUs?
Yeah, I don't think it's even done at the subcommittee yet.
So we should just maybe commit to organize to make sure we turn people out. That's all.
And speak on it when it appears.
That's what I mean, yeah, you know, do the turnout thing for city council.
Okay.
Yeah.
When it's a question.
When it comes up and perhaps somebody on the call might be able to help us figure out when that might be, but that makes a difference if we know, if everybody shows up.
And I just want to say that this is an election year for city councilors.
Yep, yep.
That influences people to some degree as far as being able to get votes from white people in single family houses. And so we have that obstacle, I think. I don't want to say it as though it's a heavy burden that all white people in single family houses behave this way, but we do know that there's a significant voter population that are white people in single family houses that are against ADUs.
Because they falsely perceive that their property values will go down and they'll lose money.
They're uneducated as far as the reality of ADUs, correct? Yep, that is correct.
You think using the strategy though of like your children are coming back from college, or you know, like your example of your daughter and child and grandchild living together, that we all, you know, housing is such a crisis that there are going to be times when we need to take our family members in, or you know, our aging parents, or whatever the case may be. I think that's that tactic and that strategy would be a good way to sell it to people. And it's really about trying to get in front of people and inoculating them. So like you said, if you start doing it now, as the spring comes, it's a good opportunity to, you know, even canvass your neighborhood, right? Like, hey, do you know this is coming up?
I just wanted to mention that, you know, since Cassie had mentioned, you know, that Massachusetts' population since 2010 had increased by about 3,000.
Can we hear it louder, please?
Yeah, you know, that Massachusetts' population had grown, you know, kept pace with national average population growth since the 2010 census. You know, while the rate of housing development was about a third of the population growth. Because of that, Massachusetts has actually had a population decline for years. We went over 7 million as of the 2020 census. Population is now back to about 6.9 million.
That's because the average age of 10 years due to the COVID thing.
Well, there was a significant, you know, population loss due to COVID in Massachusetts.
Yep.
But we also, a lot of it is also people moving out of state because there isn't a place for them to move to.
Yeah, exactly.
Can't afford
Yeah.
housing this year.
And we're losing our young people who come here to go to school. like-
We need to wrap up because we're
Yeah.
getting past the time. So next meeting is April 23rd at 5:30. We are having the coordinating committee election. Do you want to run? Let us know, or email contact@solidaritylowell.com. Does anybody want to help us with reminder calls and texts for the next meeting? That's Chris's.
That's my thing, but let me get back to the first topic that you just said. You would really like to have a few more helpers in the coordinating committee. It's a lot of work, and the more people we have, the easier it is on everybody. And it doesn't require any prior knowledge of anything. So if you're interested, talk to us, please. And the same thing goes for the reminder texts. It takes about 10, at most 15 minutes a month, where you're sending out 10 to 15 texts, kind of depending on the month. You write the script and everything. You just need to do 10 to 15, cut and paste and send. And that's all. So please, we need more help on that also. Anybody that would, if you don't need to help out forever, anybody who would just like to help out for one day, for one month, please do. This is solidaritylowell.com. Thank you.
And join us online on Facebook, join our Facebook group, visit our website, follow us on Instagram, or follow us on Twitter.
No TikTok, huh?
No,
Yes.
not
Yeah,
yet.
Yeah.
We keep trying to
Thank
get the
you
hip
for
youth.
attending,
And
everybody.
If you're recording, you can stop now.
Do you use a software for your texting or